You wake up, and the thought arrives before you're even fully conscious. I don't want to get out of bed. Not because you're tired, not because you didn't sleep enough, but because the act of rising, of moving into the day, of engaging with the world, it feels fundamentally pointless. The alarm goes off, and you hit snooze. Not out of laziness, but out of something closer to dread. The idea of standing up, getting dressed, participating in the machinery of existence, it repulses you at a level you can't quite articulate. You stare at the ceiling, and what you're really staring at is the sheer weight of having to be here, having to do this again. You tell yourself you're depressed. You tell yourself you're burned out. You scroll through your phone looking for something, anything, that might inject enough false urgency into your nervous system to propel you upright. You think, maybe I just need coffee, maybe I need a better routine, maybe I need to want something more. And the worst part, you've tried wanting things. You've tried goals, ambitions, pleasures, distractions. You've tried the gym, the side hustle, the new relationship, the dopamine hits. And here you are back in bed, feeling the same existential paralysis, the same bottomless resistance to simply existing in the world. You've diagnosed it as depression, but what if that's not quite it? What if this isn't a chemical malfunction or a failure of willpower? What if this feeling, this deep, inarticulate refusal to engage is actually your psyche recognizing something true about the structure of your life that your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet? But what if I told you that this desire to stay in bed, this resistance to rising, isn't a symptom of collapse, it's a symptom of awakening? What if your psyche is refusing to get up because it has finally recognized that the game you've been playing, the roles you've been performing, the hedonic treadmill you've been running, oh, none of it is real? What if the refusal to rise is the first honest response you've had in years? Let me explain what's actually happening here, because this isn't about laziness. This isn't about depression in the clinical sense. This is about something Martin Heidegger spent his entire philosophical career trying to articulate: the structure of inauthenticity, and what happens when that structure begins to crack. For most of your life, you've been operating within what Heidegger called das Man, the they. You wake up because they say you should. You pursue goals because they tell you those goals matter. You seek pleasure, accumulate achievements, build relationships, consume experiences, all within a framework that they have constructed. And here's the thing, it works, for a while. The hedonic carousel spins, the dopamine hits arrive on schedule, and you mistake motion for meaning. You mistake the feeling of wanting for the feeling of being alive. But the carousel requires constant maintenance. You need more novelty, more intensity, more stimulation to feel the same rush. The promotions stop mattering. The relationships stop feeling real. The pleasures start to feel like obligations. And slowly, imperceptibly, you begin to realize that you're not living, you're performing. You're acting out a script written by no one in particular, for reasons you've never examined, toward a destination you don't actually care about. And that's when the bed becomes irresistible, because the bed represents the one place where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to pretend that the hedonic games matter, where you can simply be without the exhausting charade of caring about things you don't actually care about. The refusal to get up isn't collapse, it's recognition. Your psyche is staging a strike against the inauthenticity of your life, and it's using the only weapon it has: withdrawal. Heidegger talked about thrownness, the fact that you're thrown into existence without your consent, into a world already structured by meanings and purposes you didn't choose. And for most people, the response to this thrownness is to simply accept the script. Go to school, get a job, get married, buy a house, accumulate pleasures, die. The hedonic treadmill runs smoothly because you never question whether the treadmill itself is worth running on. But sometimes, and this is what's happening to you, the structure becomes visible. You see through the game. You recognize that the goals aren't your goals, the pleasures aren't satisfying, the meaning isn't meaningful. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The bed becomes the only honest place left, because it's the only place where you're not pretending. Now, here's where most people misunderstand what's happening. They think the solution is to find better goals, better pleasures, better distractions. They think, maybe if I just find my passion, if I just discover my purpose, if I just achieve that next milestone, then I'll want to get up. So they throw themselves into self-improvement, into optimization, into the search for the thing that will finally make existence feel worth it. And this is where the trap deepens. Because what you're experiencing isn't a deficit of meaning that needs to be filled. It's an excessive clarity that needs to be faced. You don't need more reasons to get out of bed. You need to confront the fact that the entire framework of needing reasons to get out of bed is itself the problem. You've been operating under the assumption that life requires justification, that existence needs to be earned or validated through achievement, pleasure, or purpose, and your psyche is rejecting that entire paradigm. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you're an actor in a play. For years, you've been so immersed in your role that you've forgotten you're acting. You believe the character's motivations, you feel the character's emotions, you pursue the character's goals. The play is your reality. But one day, mid-performance, you glance into the wings and see the director, the stagehands, the artifice of the set. And suddenly, you can't unsee it. You're still on stage, the audience is still watching, but the script feels hollow. The motivations feel arbitrary. The emotions feel performed now. What do? The intuitive response is to look for a better script, a better role, a more compelling character. You think, maybe if I'm in a different play, I'll feel real again. So you audition for other roles, other narratives, other identities. You try being the entrepreneur, the artist, the healer, the rebel. But the problem isn't the role. The problem is that you've seen the artifice. You know it's a play. And no amount of method acting will make you forget that again. This is what's happening when you can't get out of bed. You've glanced into the wings. You've seen that the hedonic games, the social roles, the narrative structures you've been living within, they're just scripts. And now, you can't perform them with the same conviction. The bed becomes the wings, the one place where you're not on stage, where you don't have to pretend the play matters. But here's the crucial part. This doesn't mean you're broken. This means you're waking up. And if you're still here, still listening to this, maybe it's because you recognize this isn't surface-level advice. This is something deeper. If that's resonating, consider subscribing. We go into these existential depths every single week. You know where the button is? Most people, when they hit this point, try to solve it through intensification. They think, if the old pleasures don't work, I need more extreme pleasures. If the old goals don't matter, I need bigger goals. They start chasing intensity, novelty, risk. They have affairs, quit jobs, move to new cities, adopt radical ideologies. They think they're breaking free from inauthenticity, but what they're actually doing is running from the void they've glimpsed. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The void isn't outside you. It's not a temporary absence that needs to be filled. The void is the ground of existence itself, and your entire life has been structured around avoiding it. The hedonic treadmill, the narrative identities, the search for meaning, these are all elaborate defense mechanisms against confronting the fundamental groundlessness of being. And your refusal to get out of bed, it's your psyche saying, I'm tired of running. I'm tired of filling the void with distractions. I'm tired of pretending that pleasure or purpose or productivity will ever be enough to justify existence. This is what Heidegger called anxiety, not the colloquial sense of worry or nervousness, but a fundamental attunement to the nothingness at the core of existence. Most people spend their entire lives in fallenness, absorbed in the world of things, of tasks, of hedonic pursuits. They wake up and immediately fall into the stream of distraction. Coffee, emails, scrolling, working, consuming, relating. They move from one thing to the next without ever stopping to ask, who is doing this and why? But anxiety strips away the distractions. It reveals that beneath all your roles, all your identities, all your pursuits, there's nothing. No essential self, no inherent meaning, no cosmic justification for any of it. And this nothingness is terrifying. So most people run back into distraction as quickly as possible. They medicate the anxiety with pleasure, with productivity, with purpose. But you've stopped running, and that's why you can't get out of bed. Now, I must warn you about something. What I'm about to say might sound bleak, even nihilistic. You might think, so there's no meaning, no purpose, I should just give up. But that's not what this is. That's still thinking within the old framework, the framework that says life needs justification. What I'm pointing you toward is the recognition that existence doesn't require justification. The void isn't a problem to be solved. It's the truth to be inhabited. Let me tell you about someone I once knew, highly successful by every conventional measure. built a career, made money, had relationships, traveled the world, accumulated pleasures and achievements like they were collecting evidence of a life well lived. And then, one morning, they woke up and couldn't get out of bed. Not because something bad had happened, but because nothing had happened. The machinery of their life was still running perfectly, and that was the problem. The perfect functioning of the machine revealed that the machine had no purpose beyond its own functioning. They tried everything: therapy, medication, meditation, exercise, new goals, new pleasures. They changed careers, changed cities, changed partners, and none of it worked because they were still operating under the assumption that the problem was a lack of the right goal, the right passion, the right meaning. They thought they needed to find something to get out of bed for. But one morning, lying there, staring at the ceiling, they had a different thought. What if I don't need a reason? Not in a nihilistic, nothing matters way, but in a liberating existence doesn't require justification way. What if the demand for meaning, for purpose, for reasons to rise, what if that demand itself is the cage? So they got up. Not because they had a reason, but because they didn't need one. They got up the way a tree grows, the way a river flows, the way a star burns. Not for anything, not toward anything. Just the pure act of existing, without the narrative overlay of meaning or purpose or hedonic reward. And here's what changed: nothing and everything. The external circumstances of their life remained largely the same, but the inner experience, the relationship to existence itself, transformed. They stopped performing, they stopped justifying, they stopped seeking hedonic validation for the act of being alive. And in that stopping, they discovered something they'd been running from their entire life: the simple, groundless, unjustifiable fact of being here. This is what happens when you stop trying to escape the void and instead turn to face it directly. You realize the void was never empty, you were just looking away. Heidegger called this resolute authenticity, the willingness to exist without the comforting narratives, without the hedonic distractions, without the false sense of purpose provided by Das Man. It's not about finding meaning, it's about existing without needing meaning. It's not about discovering your purpose, it's about recognizing that purpose is something you project, not something you find. And here's the extraordinary thing. Once you stop demanding that existence justify itself, once you stop trying to fill the void with pleasure or purpose, the resistance disappears. The desire to stay in bed, that refusal to engage with the hedonic machinery, it loses its grip, because the bed was never really about rest, it was about strike action. Your psyche was refusing to participate in the charade. But once you stop performing the charade, there's nothing to refuse. You might be thinking, okay, but what do I actually do? How do I live without purpose, without meaning, without reasons? And here's where it gets paradoxical. Because the answer is, you don't do anything differently. You still rise, you still engage, you still make choices. But the inner relationship transforms. You're no longer performing existence for some imagined audience, no longer justifying your life to some internalized they, no longer chasing hedonic rewards to validate the act of being here. You simply exist. And that simplicity, that groundless, unjustified existence is the only authentic freedom there is. If this is hitting different for you, maybe it's time to go deeper. We explore these existential terrains every week. Subscribe if you want to keep walking this path. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. Because I'm not suggesting you become a nihilistic zombie, passively floating through existence. What I'm suggesting is a fundamental reorientation of your relationship to action itself. Right now, every action you take is weighted with significance. You get out of bed because you should, because there are consequences, because people are depending on you, because you have goals, because you need to feel productive, because you're trying to build towards something. Every action is transactional. You do X in order to achieve Y. And this transactional relationship to existence is exhausting because it means you're never enough as you are. You're always performing toward some future validation, some hedonic payoff, some proof that your existence is justified. But what if you acted without that weight? What if you got out of bed not because you should, but because getting out of bed is what's happening? Not as a passive surrender, but as an active participation in the unfolding of existence without demanding that the unfolding means something. This is what the Stoics understood, what the existentialists circled around, what Heidegger was pointing toward with his concept of being toward death. When you fully confront the groundlessness of existence, when you face the void without flinching, you're freed from the tyranny of needing life to make sense. You can act without needing the action to justify you. You can engage without needing the engagement to prove anything. And this is where the fear comes in. Because, if you're honest, part of you doesn't want this freedom. Part of you wants the hedonic rewards, the narrative meaning, the sense of building towards something. Part of you wants to believe that if you just find the right goal, the right pleasure, the right purpose, then existence will finally feel worthwhile. But you already know that's a lie. You've tried the goals, the pleasures, the purposes, you've run the hedonic experiments, and here you are, back in bed, confronting the same existential paralysis. The bed isn't the problem. The bed is the messenger. And the message is, you cannot escape the void through intensification. You cannot fill the groundlessness with meaning. The only way through is to stop trying to escape. Now, let me be very clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you should passively accept suffering. I'm not saying you should abandon goals or stop pursuing things you care about. I'm not suggesting a retreat into apathy or nihilistic detachment. What I'm suggesting is that you reverse the order of operations. Right now, you think, I need a reason to get up gives, then I can get up gives, then I'll feel alive. But this is backwards. The authentic order is, I exist, gives, I rise, gives meaning, emerges from the act of rising. You're waiting for justification before you'll participate, but justification only emerges through participation. You're demanding the script makes sense before you'll act, but the sense-making happens through the acting. Heidegger talked about care as the fundamental structure of human existence. Not care in the sense of emotional concern, but care as the basic orientation of being engaged with existence. When you refuse to get out of bed, you're not refusing life, you're refusing the inauthentic way you've been relating to life. You're refusing the hedonic games, the performative scripts, the transactional meaning-making. But the danger is that in refusing the inauthentic, you also refuse the authentic. You throw the baby out with the bathwater. You mistake disengagement for clarity, paralysis for wisdom. The bed becomes not a site of strike action, but a site of surrender. And this is where most people get stuck. They see through the hedonic games, they recognize the void, and then they collapse into paralysis, thinking that paralysis is somehow more honest than action. But it's not. Paralysis is just another form of running. It's running through freezing instead of through intensification. It's still a refusal to face the groundlessness directly and act anyway. Here's what you need to understand. The authentic response to the void isn't to fill it, but it's also not to fall into it. The authentic response is to exist alongside it, to carry it with you, to act in full knowledge of the groundlessness without demanding that the ground appear. This is what Camus was getting at with his myth of Sisyphus, not that you should embrace meaninglessness and give up, but that you should embrace the absurdity and act anyway. You push the boulder up the hill, not because the hill means something, but because you're the kind of being that pushes boulders. Not for anything. Not toward anything, just the pure act of existing, fully aware of the groundlessness, and choosing to rise anyway. And here's what happens when you make this shift. The resistance dissolves. The bed loses its magnetic pull. Not because you've found a reason to get up, but because you no longer need one. You rise the way a plant grows toward light, not because the light means something, not because growing is justified, but because growing is what plants do. You exist because you exist, and existence requires no further justification. Now, this doesn't mean life becomes easy. This doesn't mean the void stops being unsettling. What it means is that you stop waiting for the void to close before you'll live. You stop demanding that existence makes sense before you'll participate. You get out of bed not because the day promises meaning, but because the act of rising is itself the meaning. Not meaning as a noun, a thing you have or don't have, but meaning as a verb. An ongoing process of sense-making that happens through engagement, not before it. And if you're still here, if this is cutting through the noise, you might want to stay. We're going deeper into these questions every single week. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring this territory. So let's address the obvious objection. You're thinking, this sounds like philosophical word games. I still wake up, and I still don't want to get up. How does any of this help? And you're right to be skeptical, because I'm not offering you a technique. I'm not giving you a 5-step process to motivation. What I'm offering is a reframe so fundamental that it dissolves the problem at its root. The problem isn't that you don't want to get out of bed. The problem is that you think not wanting to get out of bed is a problem. You've pathologized your own clarity. You've turned your psyche's legitimate rebellion against inauthenticity into a symptom that needs to be fixed. And every attempt to fix it only deepens the inauthenticity, because you're still operating within the framework that says, I should want to get up. There's something wrong with me if I don't, but there's nothing wrong with you. Your resistance is appropriate. The hedonic games are exhausting. The performative scripts are hollow. The narrative meanings are arbitrary. Your psyche sees this and it's refusing to participate. The only mistake you're making is thinking that this refusal means you've failed. You haven't failed. You've graduated. You've seen through the illusion. And now you're in the liminal space between the old paradigm and something new. And this space, this groundless, uncomfortable, void-adjacent space, this is where transformation actually happens. Not transformation as in finding new goals or new pleasures or new meanings, but transformation as in fundamentally altering your relationship to existence itself. Learning to exist without the scaffolding of justification, learning to act without the validation of hedonic rewards, learning to rise without needing reasons to rise. Heidegger called this the call of conscience. Not conscience in the moral sense, but conscience as the voice of your own authentic existence, calling you out of the comfortable fallenness of Das Man and into the uncomfortable freedom of being yourself. The desire to stay in bed is the call of conscience. It's saying, stop performing, stop pretending, stop filling the void with distractions. Face the groundlessness and then rise anyway. But most people misinterpret the call. They think it's calling them to retreat, to give up, to collapse. They think the message is, it's all meaningless, so why bother? But that's not the message. The message is, it's all groundless, so stop demanding ground. Stop waiting for justification. Stop performing for validation. Just exist. And when you finally hear the call correctly, when you stop trying to fix the resistance and instead listen to what it's telling you, that's when the transformation happens. You get out of bed, not because you've overcome the resistance, but because you've understood it. You rise not in opposition to the void, but in full acknowledgement of it. And in that acknowledgement, you discover a kind of freedom that the hedonic life can never provide. The freedom to exist without needing existence to prove itself worthy. This is terrifying, by the way, because it means giving up the quest for justification. It means abandoning the search for the ultimate goal, the ultimate pleasure, the ultimate meaning that will finally make it all worth it. It means accepting that there is no worth it. There's only the groundless fact of being here, and the choice moment by moment to participate or withdraw. And most people, when they reach this point withdraw, they stay in bed, not because the bed is comfortable, but because participation feels pointless. They think, if there's no ultimate meaning, no hedonic payoff, no cosmic justification, then why get up? And this is the final trap, because they're still thinking in terms of why. They're still demanding that existence answer to their need for reasons. But what if you got up without asking why? What if you participated without demanding justification? What if you existed in full knowledge of the groundlessness, the absurdity, the void and chose to rise anyway? Not heroically, not tragically, but simply. Just the act of existing, stripped of all the narrative overlay, all the hedonic expectations, all the performative scripts. This is what authentic existence looks like. It's not dramatic, it's not intense, it's not particularly meaningful in the narrative sense. It's just ... here, fully here, present to the groundlessness, acting anyway. And here's the paradox. Once you stop seeking meaning, meaning arises naturally. Not meaning as a thing you find, but meaning as the texture of engaged existence. The coffee tastes real because you're not consuming it to fill a void. The conversation matters because you're not performing for validation. The work is engaging because you're not doing it to justify yourself. Everything becomes more vivid, more present, more real, not because you found some deeper purpose, but because you've stopped filtering existence through the lens of whether it's worth it. Camus said, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, not the achievement, not the goal, not the hedonic reward, The struggle itself, the pure act of rising, knowing full well that the boulder will roll back down, and rising anyway. Not because it means something, but because rising is what you do. And if you've made it this far, if you're still here, still listening, you already know this isn't shallow content. We go into these depths every week. Consider subscribing if you want to keep walking this path. So, what do you actually do? Tomorrow morning when the alarm goes off and the familiar dread arrives, what then? Do you force yourself up? Do you stay in bed? What's the authentic response? And here's where I'm going to tell you something you might not want to hear. There is no technique, there is no method, because any technique, any method, any protocol, that's just another form of the same hedonic game. That's still trying to solve the problem by doing something, achieving something, optimizing something. That's still operating within the framework that says existence needs to be managed, controlled, justified. What I'm pointing you toward isn't a technique, it's a recognition. And the recognition is this: you're already free. You've always been free. The cage was never real. The need for justification, you invented it. The demand for meaning, you imposed it. The hedonic treadmill, you built it. And you can step off anytime you choose. But this is crucial. Stepping off doesn't mean stopping. It doesn't mean staying in bed forever. It means getting up without the weight. It means acting without the transactional expectation. It means existing without the demand that existence prove itself worthy. So, tomorrow morning when the alarm goes off, here's what you do. Nothing. Don't force yourself. Don't guilt yourself. Don't try to manufacture motivation. Just notice the resistance. Notice the dread. Notice the thought, I don't want to get up. And then ask yourself, who doesn't want to get up? Because if you look closely, you'll notice something strange. There's the thought, I don't want to get up, and then there's the awareness of the thought. There's the resistance, and then there's the awareness of the resistance. And that awareness, that's not stuck. That's not paralyzed. That's not weighted with dread. That awareness is already free, already here, already present. The bed isn't holding you. The resistance isn't stopping you. What's stopping you is the belief that you need a reason to move. But awareness doesn't need reasons. It just is.